Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is July 18th, 2024, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? Before I begin, I apologize in advance. I know I haven't made a video in the last few days, but I just was away. I didn't have the chance to make a video, so thankfully I'm back, and I will be making videos far more regularly now. First of all, I want to go over the map. There's been a few changes, and then I'll go over the news in the last few days. So let's talk about northern Kharkiv, and again, there isn't that much to update you guys in this sector. We know that the Russians launched their offensive in early May. They managed to grab pretty good amount of territory in the first few days, but then they got stuck because they met the first line of defense of the Ukrainian forces. And right now, that's pretty much the same situation. As a matter of fact, we know that the Ukrainians were able to counterattack in certain sectors, especially around Vovchansk. And now the fighting, as you can see, is really ongoing in the center northern parts of the city of Vovchansk. So the same situation, we can see the same situation right now in Vovchansk. The Russians have not been able to take control over the entirety of the city. And as a matter of fact, the Ukrainians have been able to turn things around and start pushing and driving the Russians out of Vovchansk. So this is overall very positive. And additionally, the same goes for the other small incursion that is closer to Kharkiv city, where you can see that the Ukrainians, especially around Hleboke, the small little village, have been able to counterattack and drive out the Russians a little bit further away. And after Hleboke, once the Russians are driven away, because I believe that they won't be able to hold to this village for much longer, the Russians will have to withdraw really close to the border with Ukraine. So overall, the situation is looking stable, and we can see that the Russians have expanded a lot of resources. They've wasted a lot of men and lives to take very little in the northern sector. Additionally, I need to mention an important thing here is that the governor of Belgorod mentioned that he will have to evacuate about 14 settlements located around the border with Ukraine because they're pretty much, ruined, and it doesn't make sense anymore to have civilian population living there. So you can see that there's a reversal of Putin's wish to have a sanitary zone in Ukraine, except now it's in Russia. So overall, things are looking very good here. And indeed, we have to expect that in the foreseeable future, the Russians will still be able to hold on to a certain amount of buffer here because it's simply too hard to drive them out completely from the exact borders with Russia, between Russia and Ukraine, right? Like the Russians still have routes. There's still a lot of settlements, so they can still continue moving their troops within Ukraine and hold this small little buffer zone. So unfortunately, that's the situation. But fortunately, we know that the Russians won't be able to get close to Kharkiv. That's just a pipe dream at this point for them. And I'll talk a little bit about this at the end of the video, because there is a video I want to share with you guys with Russian, essentially, Telegram experts, pro-Russian Telegram owners, and military experts and things like that. They're discussing the prospects of the future for Russia. And it's very good to see that their orcs are coming to terms with the fact that they won't be able to be victorious in Ukraine. So this is really good news. Furthermore, let's talk about the situation, which is a little bit more critical for Ukraine right now, between Chasiv Yar, that is Bakhmut, northern Bakhmut, and also Avdiivka. So this entire sector here is where the Russians are simply throwing as much meat as possible, trying to capture as much as they can right now. And you can see that this, of course, is reaping some sort of rewards for the Russians. We've seen that the Russians have made a small partial breakthrough towards the city of New York, which is pretty, I wouldn't say worrisome, but it is something to be concerned about, because you see that this was a city that the Ukrainians controlled for over a decade now. This is the old 2014-2022 line. And so in the last few weeks, the Russians have been able to penetrate from Novoselivka here, so Novobakhmutivka, Troitske, Novoselivka, and apparently, according to rumors, the Russians found some sort of pipe or sewage line. They infiltrated it and they managed to get through the Ukrainian defenses, and then they just essentially came out somewhere around Yurivka, New York. So unfortunately, this is one of those situations where the Russians just like walking through the crappers, and then they come out and they surprise the Ukrainians. So The Ukrainians need to do a better job being able to map out these canals, these sewage lines where the Russians can, penetrate like rats. And of course, this is, a strategy that works. So this is one of those areas of concern, as we're seeing that the Russians are slowly gaining ground in the Ocheretine area, little by little. They're grabbing a farm field here, another posadka. And not that it is extremely concerning, because we see that this has been months in the making. Since last year in October, this is the extent of Russia's offensive. And we know how many men they threw to capture Avdiivka alone. And then the outskirts of Avdiivka equivalently is bad for them. Over 50,000 casualties, so they say, for Avdiivka. And we can pretty much double that as well with the rest since February, as the Russians continue with their meat wave assaults in this sector as well. The same goes for Chasiv Yar. Thankfully, in Chasiv Yar, the Ukrainians are able to hold the line here, but again, based on the videos I'm seeing, the city of Chasiv Yar has been pulverized by the Russians, because we know that, of course, the Russians are dumping their FAB glide bombs at will. And based on the recent videos of Chasiv Yar, there's not much standing there anymore. So it is extremely difficult to hold a city that is pulverized, and there's really nothing to defend anymore. So again, we need to get realistic about things, is that Russia still is able to advance, albeit very slow advancements. But of course, the Ukrainians are making the Russians pay, and the tactic is very evident at this point, that the Ukrainians, they will withdraw, but they will inflict maximum casualties for the Russians. So once the Ukrainians will be ready for a counteroffensive, now we're hoping that somewhere in 2025 that will occur. That is based on many other factors, but if, let's say, that was to happen in 2025, we know that the Russians are reaching a critical point. We've talked about in the last few weeks how many more tanks Russia has, how many more artillery systems. The Russians are literally scrapping the bottom of the barrel, trying to find something. And we've already started seeing last week or so Russians pulling out old Soviet artillery systems from the Stalin era. And now T-54 is also being moved from Moscow and other regions of Russia towards Ukraine. So you're really feeling that there is a massive drought of weaponry within Russia. And I'll talk about it a little bit later, because indeed there is a video I want to share with you guys with two Russian experts discussing the prospects of Russia's victory in Ukraine. So overall, you can see that the situation here is concerning, but again, the Ukrainians are making the Russians pay. And one thing that is extremely effective for the Ukrainians is, of course, the FPV drones. The FPV drones, we need to continue donating. We need to continue allowing the Ukrainians to build as many as possible, because they're really having a great effect against these Russian meat waves. Because right now, the Russians, they're simply betting on the quantity rather than quality. We've seen that. They're throwing cripples, they're throwing disabled people, anybody, just to grab 100 more meters of territory, right? We've seen these videos of how brutal the Russian command is. They don't care about their losses. And so these FPV drones that the Ukrainians are utilizing are really doing a lot of work right now to eliminate as many orcs as possible, especially in this sector, because the Russians feel like they have some sort of momentum and they don't want to lose it. So we have to expect more Russian gains here, but very slow for them within the end of this year. Another thing I want to mention before I end the video, you can see that the Russians also continue their offensive in south of Zaporizhia. There's nothing really much to report on, except for the fact that you can see that some of these villages that the Ukrainians grabbed last year, the Russians took them back because they just pulverized them again. Everything like Staromayorske, Orozhaina, you can see that now the Russians have been able to counterattack here because these villages no longer exist. And so you can see that there's a small counteroffensive by the Russians in this sector as well. Furthermore, there's been a confirmation with Krenke, which is the same situation. This was the small bridgehead that the Ukrainians held for many months, but now it's been confirmed that the Ukrainians withdrew from Krenke. And again, based on the videos and images, there's really nothing to hold there. All the houses are pulverized. The territory around Krenke is also entirely pulverized. Trees are all burned out. There's really nothing to defend. So the Ukrainians made the wise decision to withdraw. The hope was last year that by holding this bridgehead and with a counteroffensive from Ukraine this year, this would have helped the Ukrainians to further build the bridgehead, continue advancing here. But you can see, unfortunately, the Ukrainians had a massive drought of help, especially from the United States, in the first half of this year. first few months of this year. And so the Ukrainians were just on defense mode the entire time in Krinky, Kozachi Lahiri. So unfortunately, that's the situation. But of course, this came at a great cost for the Russians. But we also need to highlight that for the Ukrainians, it's not like it came without any losses on the Ukrainian side. And there's been a report mentioning that over 800 Ukrainian soldiers have apparently are missing in action. So these are Ukrainian Marines that went to fight around Krinky. So this, of course, comes at a great loss for the Ukrainians as well. And we can debate whether this decision was right or not. But, at the same time, battles will be lost. And that's the reality of this war, is that the Ukrainians aren't fighting some sort of minuscule army. Where they're fighting an army that has millions of people ready to kill the Ukrainians, and a massive military, albeit not technologically advanced. But indeed, the Russians have, as we've seen, thousands of tanks, thousands of artillery systems, and 100 of jet fighters and airplanes available. And so this is, of course, difficult. So battles will continue to be won and lost on both sides. The most important is that Ukraine wins the war against Russia. It must come out victorious. So that's the kind of map update I wanted to give you guys. Again, we're really talking about small map changes here and there. So there's nothing really critical for Ukraine, neither for Russia either. We see that the Ukrainians don't have the counteroffensive abilities right now. And the whole strategy, as I will continue to say for the next few weeks, is to really weaken the Russians, make them pay for every inch of ground that they take, to the point that once Ukraine will be ready, and I'm hoping that by next year they will be ready for some sort of counteroffensive ability against the Russians, a counterattack, that the Russians will be so exhausted, they will have nothing to defend with, that eventually this will create a huge breakthrough for the Ukrainians. We can only hope that this happens. Now, let's go over the news. And first, I found this article to be very interesting. And this came out from Ukrainska Pravda. So this was a poll that was done with Ukrainian people, essentially asking the Ukrainians what they think when they hear either the word Russia or ordinary residents of Russia. And you can see here pretty much the typical expected views that are no different compared to our views. So you guys as well, you can see that whenever they were asked about Russia, the Ukrainians often mention enemy, occupant, aggressor, hatred, killers, terrorists, swear words, etc. And then when we're talking about ordinary residents of Russia, the Ukrainians answered as their one words that would describe them: zombified, stupid, uneducated, swear words, non-humans, enemies, etc. So very, negative outlook against the Russians, and that's not surprising. Even for us Westerners and in Europe, we've seen the reality of Russian society, and so this doesn't differ much from the outside views outside of Ukraine. So the silver lining, really, of this war, if there is one, is that it brought a collective understanding of Russia within Ukraine. Because back in the days, before 2022, even after 2014, a lot of Ukrainians sort of thought, maybe we can make peace with Russia. Maybe, after all, we're, bratski narod, we're kind of family. I have a Russian grandma, a Russian grandfather, etc., right? There was still a population within Ukraine that believed that you could negotiate, you could diplomatically find a solution with Russia. But now you can see that the majority of the Ukrainians don't believe that. And so, again, who would blame the Ukrainians? Ukrainians will simply never trust Russians for generations to come. And this is good news. And again, this really needs to be reinforced within the Ukrainian society, that Ukraine needs to militarize its society as much as possible, just like Israel, and come to terms that they will just have crappy neighbors for many, many decades to come, whether we like it or not, especially, because Ukraine has very trashy neighbors, that is Russia and Belarus right now, that, based on their governments, they want the extermination of Ukraine. And so they have to come to terms, the Ukrainian society, that they need to militarize further. And we're kind of still seeing this division within a Ukrainian population that right now feels like this war, won't drag on for too long, but it will. And as we're seeing right now, this war can drag on for many more years, if not decades. And so it's really important that the Ukrainians reinforce the militarization and reinforce the notion that Russia is an enemy state and never you can negotiate with them, right? And that the only true acceptable victory is the destruction of Russian military and its regime. And then we can start having diplomatic talks. Other than that, you can see that Russia simply won't change because it fosters a culture of imperialism, chauvinism, and aggression wherever it goes. Ukraine isn't the only country that felt this culture of aggression. We can talk about Georgia, we can talk about the region of Chechnya, Dagestan, about the Baltic states, even Moldova in Europe. Russia conducts its terrorist actions through various methods, not only just by invading another country, but also eliminating political rivals, eliminating spies, eliminating or doing cyber attacks, right? Trying to make life as painful as possible for the West, right? Because it's just very, as I can say, jealous of what the West has. But it also believes that it needs to destroy the West for it to, prosper and become powerful. And so, again, I don't feel much bad for the Russians, right? Again, it's a nation that is unwilling, as we've seen for 2.5 years now, to reflect and look in the mirror. And they deserve no sympathy whatsoever right now for all the consequences that are going to inevitably happen to them in the future. And I really believe that. Additionally, some good news for Ukraine now. France is preparing a new military aid package for Ukraine. You can see that according to some rumors, the French government will give about 128 VAB armored vehicles. So these are light armored vehicles compared to the Max Pros that the United States has, or Humvees. Then you have 18 self-propelled Caesars. So this is excellent because the Caesar artillery systems are some of the most modern ones, and they have a pretty good range as well. So that is good. That's going to further strengthen Ukraine's firepower. And also the 24 AMX-10 RC light tanks, which we haven't seen that much action because I believe that France actually gave an equivalent amount of AMX-10 RCs. So these are the light tanks that have actually wheels rather than like the little tires, I should say, rather than the typical tank chains. So overall, this is a good package by France, and we're seeing that Europe again is waking up and is providing assistance to Ukraine. Even if we know that the possibility of the Republican Party winning, so Trump winning the presidency this year, I believe that Europe can really pick up the tab here. Even if Trump was to do the worst case scenarios that we were expecting him to do, that is withdraw from NATO, force Ukraine into a deal with Russia, or trying to force that and try to create that, which I doubt will actually happen. I seriously doubt that Trump will be able to, broker some peace agreement within the first weeks of his within office. But the whole point is that Europe, I believe, can pick up the tab, and Europe understands now what they're dealing with, and that they cannot find a diplomatic way out with Russia. The door needs to be open for Russia always, but we've seen that Russia only understands strength and power. And so I think that France, with the help of France, Germany, the UK, the Baltic states, the Scandinavian states, Ukraine can be strengthened as well as it was when it was pretty much just the United States helping Ukraine. So I think that there is really an increase of production of military defense spending within Europe, and I think that they will be able to support Ukraine, even if in worst case scenario the United States pulls out and just completely stops the aid for Ukraine. So that is good news. And last but not least, this is the video I wanted to showcase to you guys. And so these are two Russian military, bloggers, I guess, similar to me. They're discussing the war. So these two orcs are essentially talking about, the very negative prospects for Russia. So it's very good to see that these discussions continue to happen. And I'm seeing more and more of these videos of Russians being realistic, right? Saying like, yeah, right, we're going to go to Poland and invade the Baltics and we're going to attack NATO and things like that. We can barely grab a few farm fields in Ukraine where we're fighting for weeks, if not months, to capture small villages. So you can see that here through this video that the prospects for Russia are very dire. So let me showcase this video to you guys. So I feel in my soul that the SMO might end somewhere in the vicinity of North Caucasus. How many ammo storage warehouses will the enemy destroy? Which Russian cities will the enemy strike? It's impossible to foretell. we don't have enough troops. Read Philologists in ambush. We even throw the wounded who haven't been completely healed to the front line. So you guys already know about it. I've shared with you guys these stories of cripples, Russian cripples being sent out to the front line because the Russian command simply doesn't want to give them medical services, and then they just essentially just want to terminate their contracts as quickly as possible, a one-way ticket to Ukraine, right? So then they continue on saying, it's a scary problem. It's clear that right now there is a struggle to freeze the conflict. It's clear that Moscow sees that it can't win. Now everyone is talking about a truce, yes? Right, and indeed you can see that there's also the messages coming from Putin's elites and his minions talking about we're ready for a peace agreement, and where Russia starts talking about it. It's because Russia understands how much of a bad situation it's in. And I think we're really going to start feeling the consequences, or the Russians will feel the consequences next year in 2025. I think that this is going to be really the breaking point for Russia, 2025 and 2026, where Russia can quickly collapse. So you can see that this is the reason why Putin's gang right now are going internationally and talking about, oh, we have our peace plans and we're ready to talk with Ukraine. We've seen that. But of course, Putin's only hope right now is Trump, right? We've seen that Trump is currently voicing a very pro-Russian narrative. He just selected JD Vance as his VP, which is very anti-Ukrainian, but I believe that they're more opportunist, right? Because a few years ago, JD Vance is the guy that was saying that, compared essentially Trump to Hitler, and saying that Trump was a threat to democracy. Now he's the VP, right? So I believe that there's a lot of opportunism, and I think that a lot of the things that Trump and JD Vance are saying are just so they can be popular and be elected in November. But the reality will hit them. They won't be able to broker a deal with Putin in a matter of a few days or weeks, right? This is ridiculous. And so I think that the reality will really hit the Trump administration if they are elected into office. And this is a realistic, unfortunately, scenario. And that's the unfortunate part, is that we don't know what they're really going to do. But we need to be prepared for the worst case scenario. We know what the Biden administration is going to provide. It's stability. It is this lack of decisiveness, but at least the Ukrainians can expect that. With Trump, it's completely unexpected what Trump will do in the first few months in office. And so this is why this is Putin's really last hope, that if Trump is elected, he can convince Trump to force Ukraine into a bad deal. And we simply cannot allow the Russians to get away this time. How many Minsk agreements does Ukraine need to sign to prove to the world that Russia, you can't make deals with them, right? It's short-term peace for a long-term war, and a very painful war that will not only affect Ukraine but the rest of the world. If Russia freezes this war again and then rearms, and then maybe its ambitions won't just be in Ukraine but the Baltics, Scandinavian countries like Finland, we never know. So the importance of defeating Russia right now is extremely high. And if Trump is elected, Zelensky's administration, and they have to start doing it right now, is putting their eggs in multiple baskets, and most importantly, having discussions with the advisors, the staff of Trump, and telling them that you want to beat China, because this is, the logo of Trump is that we need to beat China. China's a threat. You need to also beat Russia. They go 2 and 2 together, and Russia is as important as China or Iran is. So that's going to be really important to get that message across to Trump's administration if, unfortunately, he is elected, right? We never know, and especially with what happened over this weekend. Forgot to mention that as well, with Trump almost getting assassinated by a 20-year-old kid, talking about a massive security failure there. But that definitely helped Trump, in my opinion, right? Showcasing him as a martyr, that he almost died, and there's somebody out there. The conspiracy theories are running wild, which are only helping Trump right now. So even though we know that the kid that almost killed Trump was actually a registered Republican, and it's his family as well were pro-Trump, from what I understand. So this is sort of a message that is difficult to pass by the Republicans, especially if the guy that tried to kill him seems to be more conservative and Republican than Democratic and left. So overall, you're seeing that, unfortunately, we're still seeing a realistic scenario where Trump can come into office in January 2025. And that can be, I believe, more bad news for Ukraine. But again, we can't Also, it's not like it's going to be catastrophic in my opinion either, because I believe that Europe can step in and provide that support that Ukraine needs to be able to continue fending off Russia and continue fighting. The Ukrainians are ready to do that because they understand that you cannot make a deal with Russia. So that's the video for today, guys. I know I've talked so much and it's been a very long update, but I just want to, bring up all of these news to you guys. So let me know in the comment section what you think about the prospects of Russia slowly collapsing and perhaps start really collapsing in 2025, 2026. I believe that is really realistic, but it's really based on the condition that perhaps the Biden administration wins, Europe continues with its support, and they will be able to bring down Russia. So let me know in the comment section, and I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much, and Slava Ukraini.